We are linking up, as earlier promised, to Alfred Obengo, who is the chairperson of the National Nurses Association. And of course, we'll be shortly linking up with him via way of Skype, and we'll be seeking his sentiments. Of course, he's online now as directed by my producer. Back there, we have Alfred Obengo, who is the chairperson of the National Nurses Association. Good morning, Mr. Obengo. Appreciated. Thank you for joining us here on the broadcast. What's the status of the frontline workers who are nurses in this case in the country in regard to the response outlined by the government in responding to COVID-19 in the country?
As usual, I can say as we are ready, and we are ready to combat this disease because that's our core duty with also other health professionals. But our readiness should also be complemented with what it takes to treat this disease. And this takes me still to the issue of equipping us with the right, adequate personal protective gears, which is still an issue as we talk today.
It is an issue, yes, of course, and it's a concern for many Kenyans because already we are below the threshold as required by the World Health Organization, because we are short of that by about 72,000 nurses to hit the required about 130,000 plus. Is that a supplementing problem to the already existing problem in the country?
As of now, we have about 30,000 nurses in employment. We have about 20,000 in the public sector and about 10,000 in the private sector. So if you compare that to the number and of PPEs that have been supplied, there's a very, very big variation. And that's why we are saying that if you want us to be effective insofar as combating the disease at the front line, give us the right artillery. Don't send a soldier to the battlefront without a gun or a bullet. That doesn't make sense.
And what has been the response of the government when you reached out, or the key stakeholders in this regard, of course, the government agencies, in regard to the shortage you experience in terms of the personnel protective equipment, the PPEs? What has been the response?
We understand, because we are also human and we live in a global village. We understand the global challenge that all nations are actually experiencing. But we want our government to demonstrate that actually something that we can put our finger on is being done. That these are the number of PPEs that we have supplied to Mandera. These are the number of PPEs we have supplied to Bungoma. These are the number of PPEs we have supplied to Kisumu. We should start getting the statistics, the real number of PPEs which have been supplied to these areas and counties. That will help us now understand as of what is the shortage, how much do we need, and things like that. But just telling us that PPEs have gone to the health workers, how many are they? And are they the right standard?
And given what has been happening then ever since the weekend, and of course when we saw the shipping in of equipment numbering up to thousands, of course the government says will be deployed and will help the frontline workers. Do you think that will not help in your regard? And are you still skeptical about the government's move in regard to protecting the frontline workers who are the healthcare workers in the country?
How do we even get skeptical or reassured on something we've not seen? That is why I'm emphasizing, let us see those PPEs being received at the airport and coming from the airport, maybe probably going to whether it's KEMSA or the warehouses, and then from there, they go to the users. And then it is demonstrated that it has come from the airport to KEMSA and to the users. Let us not just receive them, but demonstrate that they have reached the users at the right place.
Okay, and given that, of course, we already are in a state where our infrastructure in terms of the healthcare capacity of the country is wanting. We are there's deficit in terms of the equipment, shortage in essential drugs across hospitals in the country. And there appears further, which is the main problem here, and it's more significant for the Kenyan Mwananchi, the collective lack of endeavor from the nurses union and the government. What happens then in the midst of this pandemic? Why the divisions? Where is the uniform voice for you to attend to the pandemic and address these issues which are underlying later when the dust settles on COVID-19?
You know, I can say it's fortunate, or it's also unfortunate, but it's fortunate that we have a new cabinet secretary at the helm, the Minister of Health, whom is working very, very hard and has also breathed in some fresh air insofar as leadership is concerned. But it has been baptized by fire. But alongside that, the COVID pandemic has just exposed glaringly the systemic rot that we have in the healthcare delivery system. We need to fix the systems from Afya House up to the lowest echelon of healthcare delivery system. That is what this COVID pandemic actually has exposed, that the systems actually are not aligned. Sometimes you hear the national government saying this, you'll hear the county governments also saying this, and yet we are fighting the same disease and the same enemy. So we will not wish to go into that, but we want to implore on all stakeholders to bring their efforts together so that we have a joint approach, a joint effort to face this one enemy.
And given, to just quote what the Director General of the Ministry of Health, Dr. Patrick Amoth, at one point said that after attending to suspected patients or patients who are positive, the healthcare workers are taken to a center where they are tested and their situation or welfare is guaranteed. Then we had Seth Panyako, the Secretary General of the Kenya National Union of Nurses in the country, who said that's not the real picture on ground. There appears to be no compelling, clear and consistent channel of communication between the union and the government. Who does the Kenyan Mwananchi get the information from? At what source?
You don't expect my brother Seth Panyako to talk about what he has not seen. And you don't expect the nurses on the ground to give us feedback on what they have not seen, either me or Panyako. So they'll only tell us what they can demonstrate that is truthful. So that's why I'm still imploring to the government, as you make that statement, can it come with straight face, or this is how has once they come from this clinical environment where they're in direct contact with the COVID-19 patients, demonstrate in practice, not just in speech, so that we can all see. And actually, as the famous saying says, seeing is what? Is believing.
So, and in raising the concern, of course, there's a legitimate ground for you to call for personal protective equipment, which are very important, very paramount, even as you stay at the front line. But how does the government then ensure that you, the nurses who are at the forefront, do not become patients? What are the safeguards here, the guarantees and the assurances that the healthcare workers also do not infect their families who they go to in the evening after attending to their cardinal responsibility?
The guidelines are so simple and they're there. Just like we enforce the guidelines of curfew and so on and so forth, and putting on mask for every person who is in contact with the community. The guidelines is so far as handling the health workers is also very clear and it's there. That is why we need to enforce it equally. We know, and I've always repeated this, let us borrow the best practices from the nations who have recovered from this pandemic. Let us borrow the best practices, how they used to handle their health workers. Let us not borrow the bad practices, but the good practices. How did China attend to their nurses, to their doctors, to their clinicians? How did they safeguard them so that they have minimum loss of the healthcare workers? You cannot expect a healthcare worker who has attended a COVID-19, who has tested positive in a clinical environment, to mingle freely with the community. Even what is happening in the places where they have been managed to contain it is that there are special accommodation arrangement that has been arranged so that you come and you also prepare to prepare your family too, that for this length of time, I may be in such a place that I'll not be with you. So these are things that can be enhanced just by simple communication techniques.
Okay,
and demonstration that.
Yes, go ahead, please.
And demonstration that if I say today, as a government official, that we have set aside such and such a place for nurses who are working in Bagadi or KNHID used to go, let it be demonstrated. That's what I'm insisting. Let it be demonstrated with evidence.
All right, but there are, of course, best practice examples that Kenya can copy from or lessons from the top that Kenya can epitomize. But it's unfortunate you cite China, where the President Xi Jinping's government put in isolation the doctor who first raised the alarm on COVID-19 in the city of Wuhan in Hubei province. He later died of the virus. The government accused by the UN agencies of using lies, cover-ups and repressions in response to COVID-19, not reporting the actual numbers. I mean, what lessons can you learn from China in containing the virus when there has been repression and what appears to have been a censorship on the Chinese media in what the Chinese people see, hear and read?
I have said, my brother, let us not copy the bad ones. We copy the good ones. The bad ones we condemn and we leave it to them.
But what extent of coverage has come, or have you learned from the Chinese approach in terms of censorship on its media? What has been very practical and true about the exact picture in China on your end that the government can copy?
I'm talking about handling of healthcare workers per se.
But the government mishandled the doctor who first raised the flag on COVID-19, put him in isolation, he died, and there are many healthcare workers who have reportedly died, but that's not reported because of the censorship on the Chinese media.
Those are isolated cases, and we cannot copy that. What I'm saying is specifically, if they happen to have taken the nurses or the doctors and the clinicians who are taking care of the COVID-19 patients to a specific environment as per the WHO guidelines, that is what we should copy. But if they're suppressing them, we can't copy that. We can't.
Okay, but the problem
everything we are doing as per the WHO guidelines and directives. Okay. We are not coming out with our own inventions.
Okay, but there's a concern.
Standardized, scientific.
All right, but there's a concern also as to the Chinese influence in the UN system and the support they offered as a veto power to the appointment of Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, and that the World Health Organization failed to term it a pandemic and have been fed by the Chinese media and authorities instead of relying on its office in China, therefore delayed and caused all this global problem, prompting America, which is its biggest funder, to cut resources.
As Kenya and as health workers of Kenya, it may be difficult for us to influence the geopolitics outside there. Very, very difficult. We know the enormous influence that Chinese have, the enormous influence about the resources that are controlling the geopolitics out there. What we must concentrate on is to ensure that our people, our health workers are safe. And we are following the scientific laid down guidelines, which have been tested and verified to safeguard ourselves and manage this pandemic.
Okay, and of course they remain important. You remain important as to what happens to our nurses and the level of response by the government. We'll be coming back to you, Bona Alfred Obengo. You'll still be online. Equally, we have our guests on set, 2 lawyers, of course, well established in the country. Wakili Mugambi Echesa is an advocate of the High Court. Good morning. I appreciate your time. Asante sana. It has been a while. And Ken Echesa is equally a lawyer, and he lectures at the University of Nairobi School of Law. Gentlemen, we have a lot to discuss, including racial discrimination reports in China, the Africans and Kenyans by extension, and what's happening generally to the Africans in China. Later, we'll be, of course, finishing up with the House on the Hill quest in 2022, the DP William Ruto, the chances, and the cartoon edition of the day, which is an illustration of an isolation now put by the fierce critics of the Deputy President William Ruto in regards to his ambition come 2022 as relations sour in the ruling Jubilee party. But how will President Uhuru Kenyatta head off the cases or the uncertainties raised by his Deputy William Ruto of constant rejection in the party? And will it hold up after 2022? That's coming up next after the break here on the broadcast. The number is 0791 478 990. The hashtag on Twitter is NewDayKE. The short SMS code is 40920. Stay tuned. We are coming back after the break here on the broadcast. Good morning. Welcome back. You are watching the broadcast. Thank you for staying with us. We were to finish up with Alfred Obengo, the chairperson of the Nurses Union in the country, but he had to rush to an emergency meeting at Afya House in Nairobi in regard to, of course, the COVID-19 response in the country, even as he highlighted the needed response from the government to secure or immune the healthcare workers who are the forefront of the fight against the pandemic here in the country. Later, we'll be talking to the regional director of the Kenya Red Cross here on the broadcast in regard to the response they are rolling out for the affected persons in the counties of Elgeyo Marakwet and West Pokot as to what happened, of course, on Saturday following the mudslides that killed at least confirmed 3 cases and buried more than 5 others in regards to, of course, the communications issued by the regional director and the commander, George Natembea, who is based in the region. Good morning, though, gentlemen. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for showing up on the broadcast in regard to, of course, the racism accusations of what appears to be transpiring in China in the second wave of virus, affecting not only Kenyans but Africans by extension. Wakili Ken Echesa, in your view of what's transpiring at the moment, even as we take a look at the approach globally in regard to the Chinese discrimination reports in the city of Guangzhou, is it an institutional racism supported by the authorities in Beijing? Because we saw videos of police helping locals in kicking out African descents in the city of Guangzhou.
First of all, I want to condemn what is happening in China to Africans and to Kenyans in particular. I do believe that it is a system-supported venture and that the Chinese government is keen on frustrating Africans, not just from Kenya, but the entire African continent on the basis of race. This is a violation, in my opinion, of fundamental human rights. Remember, every human being has a right to dignity, protection from torture, and to be treated in the most humane way. We do not need an express convention that bars China from doing this. All we need and call upon is for the Chinese government to respect customary international law. Some human rights have crystallized into customary international law, and China has no option but to respect. Kenya equally has options of dealing with the issue. Unfortunately, Kenya is so maiden to China that its response at best can be described as vague.
Okay, how about the impractical response given by the Principal Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who said, "Ndege sio matatu"? Was that the adequate needed response from the Kenyan government?
I think that is the height of diplomatic ignorance and insensitivity from a person of Masharia's caliber. Masharia is a diplomat of no mean repute. It is unfortunate that such a statement came from him, not just as an individual, but as the principal secretary in charge of foreign affairs. Masharia should understand that the core responsibility of a state is to protect its citizens. Our embassy in China is established for 2 reasons. One, to protect Kenya's strategic interests in China, be they social, economical, or political. And secondly, that embassy is established to protect Kenyan nationals in China. So when Kenyan nationals in China or elsewhere get into trouble, the first recourse should be the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And when we get blatantly arrogant statements like the one we are getting from the PS, then we say as a nation we have failed.
Okay, Wakili Lachena, when you look at the response by the government so far, and then later you hear the government saying that only those who have the capacity, the means to come back home will be facilitated. I mean, was that the needed scope, scale, and the speed of response by the Kenyan government for its mistreated, discriminated against citizens in China?
I think, first of all, we need to understand the situation is very unfortunate. And the response by the government, of course, because we expect Macharia is speaking on behalf of the government, we cannot talk about those who are capable. And because, first of all, capability has a lot of dimensions to look at it. Because they are there as citizens of Kenya. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the capability, we cannot fail to look at, first of all, if there is a flight or there are flights which may be able to transport those people, to fly those people from China to Kenya. How are you going to choose on who is capable and who is not? Are you going to take a flight with 5 people and come with empty seats because those others are not able to pay for the flight ticket or something? And just like my brother said here, it is the responsibility of the country, especially in such situations, to take care of its people. And that's one of the reasons why we were even receiving some support from WHO. Mm-hmm. Why are you given those supports? You are given as a state. Then it is you as a state to determine what is it that you think you may want to get assistance from those funds, all right? So, well, the response is by the cabinet secretary was actually unfortunate and quite misplaced. We would not expect the state to speak like that, because he speaks on behalf of the state as a diplomat, isn't it? So when you start talking of a flight not being a matatu, then what do you mean? Are you trying to tell us that you cannot be able to send for those people who are suffering there? Do you know even one individual is capable of, it has a right to come back to the country, and you, as a state, you have a responsibility to bring that person, even if it is one person, even if it is one individual. You can go for them and bring them back to the country. If wherever they are not comfortable, because we have already seen what is happening in Guangzhou, and it's quite unfortunate, and it's against, of course, international human rights.
Okay.
And I'm expecting UN will take further steps to see how to deal with that, because well, I may tell you, Ayub, and the Kenyans who are listening, whichever country you are in, you are entitled to the rights that are enjoyed by those citizens in that country. Just like my brother called them, we have those that we call, the human rights, the Charter on the international human rights has been ratified actually by all the states.
Okay.
So which China is part of it. And they have to treat those blacks, whether they are blacks, whether they are Africans, whether they are from whichever country, equally the way they are treating their citizens. It's unfortunate, but we also wait to see what the international community is going to do about it.
All
we
right.
have Chinese here in Kenya, all right?
Yes.
How do they expect us to treat them?
All right. Of course, they expect a sort of a mutually advantageous treatment of the citizens on either end. And we'll come to the UN aspect, because there are concerns about China now taking over the important UN agencies and influencing decisions in New York, where the UN is headquartered, and the concerns, of course, raised by Americans in regard to how, and the UK, how the Chinese influence is now overriding the imbued system of liberalism in the United Nations system. But Wakili Lechena, Echesa, what do you think then is perhaps informing the silence by the government in regard to the certain degree of discrimination against Kenyans in the city of Guangzhou and largely in China?
I wish to answer that by quoting Chinua Achebe, my all-time favorite African writer, who says that those whose palm kernels were cracked by benevolent spirits should never forget to be humble. I think Kenyans' palm kernels have in the recent past been cracked by China. Kenya has borrowed so much from China. Kenya is indebted to China in all ways that we cannot face China and tell them this is wrong. We are beholden to China. China has become a benevolent spirit in Kenya. It cannot be questioned. We'd rather question our ancestral spirits, but forget about questioning China. Remember, when the US was questioning the human rights records in this country at one point, one minister, the late Newton Kulundu, stood up to Ranabaga, the then ambassador, and told him off. He told Ranabaga to his face that you cannot be violating fundamental human rights in the US and in the West and come to lecture Africans. Such are the people we need in this country. At this moment, somebody who can stand up to China and tell China off. But look at Macharia. Macharia is not speaking from nowhere. Macharia is speaking for the system. Macharia is speaking for government. That seems to be the government position. And Macharia was even saying that, oh, those Kenyans in China are misbehaving. They are perhaps not respecting the regulations put in place by China. China has its own penal laws. If anyone on the territory of China violates the penal laws of China, China has a responsibility of bringing that person to law. Not all Kenyans are immune from prosecution in China. We only have a few individuals, about 2 or 3, including the ambassador, who could be immune, but the rest can face the law.
Okay, and given that, then is it what the West has been raising in terms of the concerns about the China-Africa relations? We'll come to the aspect of the foreign policy and the Chinese influence large in the African continent and across the world, and the Beijing, Washington, UK, and Moscow rivalry on the African continent in what appears to be a 21st century scramble and partition for the continent. Then what does it say then about the concern raised by the West in regard to warning Kenya to not look at the East owing to the begging bowl culture. Of course, no rigorous financial processes, as is the case with the IMF and the World Bank. And is it because of the financial help that it offered the ruling Jubilee Party that perhaps is informing all this sort of response which is half-baked from the government?
I want to agree with the West, but with some pinch of salt. One, this Africa-China relationship is coming to Kenyans and to Africa at a cost. And we are now seeing the cost, that they can violate, mistreat our people, and we cannot face them because they have fed us before, so they can beat us. And secondly, the West may not be such genuine. Remember, we once faced West, and then we had change of foreign policy to face East. So the West would want to take this situation to justify its condemnation of Africans facing East. That look here, at least we have a history with Africa. And indeed, the West has a history with Africa. They may have their misgivings, but we have had over 50 years of relationship with the West. But with the East, it is more of the government taking advantage of the East and its flexibility on borrowing and on actually being fed. What has come from China has not reached Kenyans, has not reached Tanzanians or anyone on the continent. It goes to the hands of the system. You've talked about funding of the Jubilee. Not all Kenyans were in Jubilee, for example.
Okay.
There's just about 5 million of Kenyans who are in Jubilee, who may then be happy with that Chinese funding of the Jubilee. Where do you leave the rest of the country? And as I said before, it is such things as suspected funding of the Jubilee, the loans we've taken from China, that is making this country beholden to China.
Okay. Now, aside from Wakili Echesa, the racial discrimination, what appears to be sort of an extra level of scrutiny upon Africans. But the UN did say that 80% of imported cases after the dust settled on the city of Wuhan in Hubei province were imported by the Chinese. Only 20 came from foreigners, of course, who can account for Europeans, who can account for Americans, who can account for other Asians, who can account for Africans. But with what level of, approach is the Chinese authority or the Chinese government doing this? And do you see it perhaps as an acceptable level of, well laid out discrimination against the Africans or the people from Africa generally across China?
But I wouldn't agree more, because you can see it openly. That is pure open discrimination against the Africans. Well, maybe perhaps they may be targeting the Africans because of the weaknesses that even our government itself has shown. How do you expect the Chinese, maybe a cabinet secretary or minister for equivalent position with Macharia, when Macharia shows blunt that he doesn't care about whatever is happening there.
And see, as Rachel Omamo is nowhere to be seen.
She's nowhere actually to be seen. Then openly, the cabinet secretary has shown ridicule in his own people. How do you expect them to treat them? The moment you start mistreating your individuals, or the moment I see you mistreating the person close to you, how much respect do you expect me to give them? So that is exactly what is happening. That is why even China would have the guts to do whatever they are doing without any fear or favor. The reason being, you yourself, you're not even giving your people the support that they need. Because I can tell you the truth, Ayub, if today a US citizen maybe something is done to them, one or two, the way they are doing for the Africans, I can tell you the US could even send a jet to pick one person. And like us, we are even saying they are misbehaving there. And my brother said here, if they are misbehaving, there are domestic laws there to take care of them. Then why would you show open discrimination? So it is a bit unfortunate that it is even the government itself that would be contributing to whatever that is happening in China. But the question that I'm going to ask is this. Yes, we are saying that we owe a lot to China, but we don't worship them. We owe them, yes, but it's the government who does that. I don't even know, by the way, we only hear that we have debts from China. But you, Ayub, and myself, I have not seen that money.
And the records, of course.
And the records, of course. So I don't even know how much we owe. You had the president the other day, he said, we are talking to the people who we owe so that they can give us some time, or so that they can they may not charge interest for this period and blah, blah, blah. We've not even been told how much money is owed and how was it borrowed. And I can ask you one question. It is not Uhuru who lives with the Chinese next door. It is me, it is you. How do you expect us to treat them when they are treating our brothers
Of course, we have seen some cases of retribution in other parts of the African continent, and there appears to be a lessening globalization across the world generally because of the new world order after COVID-19. We'll come to discuss that and the impact it will have on the world system. But Wakili, then it brings the question about how we have tailor-fashioned our foreign policy in the country. It's not only the Chinese affair. Look at how the government has handled the Migingo issue with Uganda. You have seen the sort of the soaring relations with Tanzania because of what happens in Namanga. There's the ICJ matter with Mogadishu at The Hague in the Netherlands, and generally the approach that the government has in terms of its diplomacy across the world. Is it a case of us now looking back, pedal back and relook at our foreign policy, our approach diplomatically to some of these affairs to set forward an upfront diplomatic approach that cares for the well-being of the Kenyans?
Absolutely. And this is a lesson to Kenyans. Institutional memory is very important. When a regime is taking over, we have some core areas of our governance that should not be replaced in toto. A foreign policy is not an overnight thing. These are relationships. You don't just cut links or change the foreign policy overnight for political interests. Our foreign policy is in a mess. I'll begin with the Migingo Island issue. You heard Museveni saying that the water is in, the land is in Kenya, but the water is in Uganda. And the government was quiet, meaning it was buying a very serious joke from a neighboring head of state. Then we have the Somalia issue, the ICJ matter. And unknown to many Kenyans, this was a legal blunder by the government of Kenya. Yeah. When ICJ is sitting, a state is required to nominate a judge to be on that panel if the state is appearing before ICJ. Kenya went ahead through the state law office and nominated a non-Kenyan judge to sit on the ICJ. And that's the blunder that we made. Does it mean that we do not have people who are specially schooled in the law of the sea in this country? Professor Situma, FDP of the University of Nairobi, is one of the universally acclaimed professors of international law, and particularly law of the sea.
And UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea.
Yeah. He is one man who would have been the automatic pick for the state. And since we messed from the beginning, without prejudice to the matter, I have no doubt that we have an uphill task as a nation, as a state, in winning that matter against Somalia. Look at China. People who are supposed to implement the foreign policy of the country are behaving as though they are on the Chinese payroll. When Macharia was speaking, a class 8, a Form 4 student would mistake Macharia to be foreign affairs minister for China. Or even the Chinese ambassador in Kenya. He was more Chinese-oriented than the Chinese themselves. He is mourning more than the bereaved. The Chinese government has not complained that Kenyans are misbehaving, but here is a PS who is already accusing Kenyans that they just have bad manners. They are misbehaving. Our foreign policy has a problem. We need to redraft the foreign policy and retrain those who are out to implement the foreign policy. Even if you had the best foreign policy with the mindset like Macharia's, how do you implement it?
And of course, it's now the third cabinet secretary ever since 2013, Ambassador Amina Mohamed, then came Ambassador Monica Juma, and here we have Ambassador Rachel Omamo. But if I may come to you then, there is the larger problem with the African context here. The AU, of course, has responded to, in terms of writing to the Chinese authorities in Beijing. But on an official level, let me just outline this. We have the SGR, for instance, in Ethiopia that connects Addis Ababa to the Djibouti capital in Djibouti. And you have the football stadiums across the continent that the Chinese have facilitated, funded. You have massive, expansive infrastructure across the continent. But on a personal-to-personal level or on person-to-person, you have cases of many Chinese discriminating against Africa in the African continent. You have cases of superiority complex where Chinese feel they are more superior to the Africans in their homeland. Africans, of course, termed as criminals, HIV/AIDS carriers, and black people who have no means or authority in this world. How do we then address, even as we seek more partnership in terms of bilateral trade relations, how do we address these then deep-sitting false sense of superiority against the Africans?
Ayub, it's quite unfortunate. that this is happening because, in a way, before even we go far, you're talking about the Chinese discriminating or doing some things which, of course, are against even our country's laws. It is not even, the matter has not slipped our mind. The Kileleshwa, the Kileleshwa issue just the other day, killing our own Kenyans openly, all right? You know, what happens is this, Ayub. When a country dominates so much on another in terms of giving grants, giving loans, and giving support, this financial support all over, they tend to behave as if they own you. They tend to behave as if they have all the right to treat you the way they feel that is right on their own. Because this issue of the Chinese government and the African governments, which are most of them, of course, have taken loans, or they're being supported by China and all that. It is a government-to-government issue, right? And I'm very sure before they take these loans, there are agreements that are drafted.
Of course, and
there are contracts.
There's a security.
Yes, that are drafted.
Okay.
And I'm very sure that in those contracts, they must be taken care of. Is it an individualism kind of contract, or is it a loan that you're giving me and I'm going to repay you back? It's like if a bank gives you a loan to build your house, then they can be sending their people to come and sleep in your house the time they want.
Okay.
You understand what I mean? So that is not how things are supposed to be.
Okay.
Okay?
Well, Wakili, we'll continue with the discussion because it's very interesting, and we have other dynamics with which we need to understand this, because there's also a concern across the world in terms of the ending, the border closures we're witnessing between the west of Europe, the east of Europe. There is an aspect of nationalism in the United States of America who feel China is now threatening the world security system in terms of the United Nations, and China blocking the United Nations Security Council to convene a meeting on why the World Health Organization delayed in calling it a pandemic, and accusations of the US now cutting funds, saying that the World Health Organization is there at the expense of China because they supported the appointment of Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, the former Ethiopian Foreign Affairs Minister. And we'll finish up with the discussion that pertains to the ruling Jubilee Party. For now, though, we cross over to the Rift Valley, where we are now joined by the Rift Valley Region Red Cross, that is regional manager, that is Nicholas Kemboi, on the rescue effort now rolled out by the government and, of course, in collaboration with other agencies, including the Kenya Red Cross. Good morning, good afternoon, my brother. And to just ask you this directly, what's the extent of the response that you're rolling out in finding out the people who are missing?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to you too, my brother at the studio. We are working on the ground with a multi-agency approach to see how we can be able to provide the humanitarian assistance to the affected households and the affected families in both the two counties of Elgeyo Marakwet and West Pokot County. And this is a coordinated approach, which is being team-led by the regional commissioner, Mr. Natembeya. And the extent of the damage is huge. And currently our efforts are on how we can be able to, one, provide the immediate humanitarian needs to those whom have been displaced by the landslide and the floods. And at the same time, support the communities with the search and recovery efforts for still unaccounted for persons.
All right, and then in terms of the response and the sort of the needed enmeshing from the county administrations in Elgeyo Marakwet and, of course, West Pokot counties, which are severely affected, are the two county administrations helping you in terms of the approach, the multi-agency approach?
Yes, the national government and the county governments, both from Elgeyo Marakwet County and the West Pokot County, are in the forefront in coordinating and leading this entire exercise. And the other partners, Kenya Red Cross included, is equally on board supporting these entire operations. And I can confirm to you in principle that yes, the support which has come in through from both the national and the county government in this exercise is commendable, and it's going a long way in reaching out to the communities. We look forward to distributing the food, a donation that has been delivered by the national government today, early in the morning, to be able to cushion the communities whom lost everything from the food needs and the other basic household needs. As from Kenya Red Cross, we are working on ensuring that we provide the necessary support that can help the communities cushion themselves from the aspects of shelter, and that is majorly looking into the non-food items. But the operations is well coordinated, and we can report that yes, the government is on top of things.
Okay, and in terms of for purposes of planning better in the future, of course, that area is prone to mudslides. Just about 4 months ago, we lost more than 50 people following heavy rains in West Pokot County. What do you plan? How do you plan better then for, of course, God forbid, another, of course, incident of such magnitude which might lead to killing of people in the two respective counties in the Rift Valley region?
I think the long-term and the mid-term investments need to have a concerted approach, and that is bringing together all the stakeholders, all the key players, plus the community to be the forefront in ensuring that we enhance and build the resilience to the adverse impacts and effects of climate change. This is not something which we can say we can achieve in the 1 year, in 2 years, but it is something which with concerted efforts and consistency in ensuring that one, the population residing in all these risky areas have been sensitized and they are able to take even lead and the initiative themselves to be able to move to safer grounds is really taken up by the community. And at the same time, looking into now the other aspects on how do we ensure that the environmental conservation and restoration programs are enhanced within this entire belt of the high-risk areas in the Kerio Valley and the parts of the highlands of Elgeyo Marakwet and West Pokot County. So this is something which you understand the challenges that we face as a country. Population has grown and people have moved into areas even which are more risky, but it calls for now all of us to sit together and be able to see how do we address this problem so that it does not become a perennial issue that will arise over and over and over. So it's something that yes, we need to do something about it, and we need to pull all our efforts together to ensure that we address these hazards and risks to mitigate future disasters.
Okay, and in doing so, of course, that is a proper laying out of what needs to be done in terms of making sure that people are moved from areas that are prone, because you understand more the geography on the affected parts. But how do you develop that communication level then, that you communicate with them, not to, because you want to create a mutually advantageous symbiotic relationship in terms of your communication structure, and who will cater for the movement of the people and settling them to other parts of the counties which are safe?
I think it calls for a participatory approach, and this has to be done majorly through public participation, so that it is not all about which agency takes lead or which entity becomes the lead entity in ensuring that this is done, but ensuring that there is that community acceptance and community participation in the communities themselves taking lead in this entire exercise. So the business is ensuring that the information gets to these communities, but that public participation will give room for them to be able to understand the underlying risks, and even them taking initiative on their own to ensure that they move into more safer grounds.
Okay, and in terms of course, the response that you have laid out, how do you, in the midst of all this that you want to do for the people in terms of ensuring that they do, or you restore their economic, of course, capacity, how do you then take precautions in terms of ensuring that this does not affect you as per the measures outlined by the government in the response to COVID-19 pandemic? Because you will want, or you do not want to have as many people as possible in one given area or geography because of the guidelines and the, of course, fears of the pandemic, which is fast spreading in the country.
Thank you very much. I know you saw from yesterday's clips and videos the bit of social distancing becoming a challenge as a result of, everybody's coming in and trying to see how they can be able to help to provide the assistance to those who may require search and rescue at that point in time. But as the operations continue and evolve, there is a lot of order and a lot of compliance to all the regulations that we require to be able to ensure that the responding teams and the communities are also safe to the other hazard of COVID-19. And so as the operation continues, you'll be able to see a lot of order and a lot of coordination, social distancing, and the use of face masks and protective equipments in the entire operation. You understand that crowds, whenever an incident happens, sometimes it becomes a challenge because everybody, there is that rush in from the community and people of goodwill, which is a positive aspect of what our communities have, but at the same time, it's an underlying risk. So that was a challenge yesterday, but as the coordination continues today, you'll be able to see and appreciate more of these controls coming in to ensure that the communities are also and the responders are safe to regards to the other secondary risks of COVID-19.
All right, Nicholas Kemboi, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us here on the broadcast and bringing us up to speed with the response you're rolling out for the affected people. And stay safe, and may they, of course, heal because of the incident which has affected them. Asante, good afternoon.
Thank you, my brother.
Asante sana. That is Nicholas Kemboi, the regional director, the Kenya Red Cross in the Rift Valley region, and he was speaking to us in regard to what has transpired in the counties of Elgeyo Marakwet and West Pokot counties following the mudslides that killed people and others missing, but rescue efforts are ongoing by a multi-agency, of course, task force that is looking into that matter. Yes, Wakili, you had a point. Go ahead, please, as we continue.
Yes, actually, I was talking about the issue of taking advantage by the states like China taking advantage of the fact that definitely they're economically able and they have given, they have supported so many of African countries. And my point was, whenever we are in such situations, or maybe we are drafting agreements for loaning, for facilities or for anything, I believe there are clauses that do protect also, they do separate the supremacy of each state on its own. So I don't want to imagine that at the moment we are still in those days. You remember when we used to say the EU, remember when the EU used to give us the loans and all that, and they would follow every coin that you're taking, wherever you are taking it, they are following it.
How you spend
tulikuwa tunaita misaada kutoka EU. I don't know. You remember? that was the only talk of those times. And I believe we are beyond that level. And what I'm trying to imagine is now what the government is thinking in terms of what is happening in China, and specifically to the citizens who are there and the way they are being mistreated. It is the responsibility of the government, and I would wish to remind Macharia, regardless of whether flights are not matatus, regardless of whatever he thinks that Kenyans are doing there, it is the responsibility of our state to take care of its citizens wherever they are. We don't want our Kenyans to feel as if they are stateless people, because unless you are a stateless, then that is the only way that we can say they can be protected. And for China, if you feel that you don't want these guys there, or they have done something wrong, or maybe they cannot be taken care of by your domestic laws, bring them back to the country.
All right, Asante sana. Wakili, Echesa, I'll come to you after the break here. We'll finish up on that, and then the subject matter that follows next is the ruling Jubilee Party, of course, the inner battle that faces President Uhuru Kenyatta, and why there seems to be uncertainty, especially what the DP is expressing through his allies in form of a political proxy war about constant rejection within the same party that, of course, he fought hard to form in 2016. And that will be our conclusion point as we come back from the break here on the broadcast. The number is 0791 478 990, the hashtag on Twitter. New Day KE, the short SMS code is 40920. Stay tuned after the break. We're coming back here on the broadcast. You're watching the broadcast. We are into the final segment of the program here, and we'll finish up on the racial discrimination aspect in China. And of course, the last question will be answered by Wakili Ken Echesa, who is a lecturer of law at the University of Nairobi School of Law here in the country, and equally alongside him is the an advocate of the High Court here in the country, and a lawyer equally, Mugambi Laichena. Thank you, gentlemen, for staying with us here on the broadcast. Coming to you, Ken Echesa, as we finish up on this broadcast, on this matter, before we cross over to the other important element. Of course, there are many who are blissfully ignorant about Trump's America First policy and why he had cut funds for the World Health Organization. But of course, for those who have been critical observing the UN system, China has managed to buy influence, especially in the most critical UN agencies. And perhaps this informs concerns that were raised by the United Nations in regard to the liberal character imbued into the system that China is trying to erode in terms of human rights, laws against discrimination on what's happening in China, and of course overtaking the mandates of other important organizations like the World Health Organization and blocking a matter raised which was to be discussed at the UN Security Council level. I mean, does this point, when you look at the Chinese end, the aspect of a new world order that will come and perhaps affect and reorient globalization as we know it at the moment?
First, I must bring it to the attention of our viewers that at the international plan, we've had calls for the review of the UN agencies, and particularly the Security Council, and to consider whether we still require the so-called veto powers. When you look at the composition of the United Nations Security Council, we have 5 permanent members, and each member wields the veto power. The 5 are the Republic of France, People's Republic of China, Russia, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and then the United States of America. On this Security Council, 3 states will always read from a similar ideological script. That is US, the UK, and France. Russia and China will always read from the same script, and they rarely agree on a matter. Whenever a matter is placed before the UN Security Council, it is ideological differences that divide this council. And that is why every member is in a rush to demonstrate his veto power. China and Russia could be minority, but they will veto powers. Even China alone can veto the decision of the United Nations Security Council. So the first reform that is urgently required is a review as to whether we still require the so-called permanent members of the UN Council that wield veto powers. And remember, America for a very long time has been a superpower and has been calling shots on the global stage. China is slowly demonstrating that it can win over the regions that were hitherto allied to America. And Africa is one of those regions. Unfortunately, and to conclude, China is where Germany was in 1917, 1918. Is also where Germany was in the 1930s. It was so powerful that it could imagine destroying the world at its own expense and at its own pride. If China is not contained, in the next 50 years or less, it has the likelihood of leading this globe into a third world war. Because we are currently at the stage of a vicious Cold War, pitting China on one side and US on the other side. When it splits, it may just give birth to a third world war.
All right. And of course, the disagreements by the UN Security Council on matters that pertain Syria, Iran, the sanctions on the Hassan Rouhani government led in Tehran, and of course, the African continent, which it has knee-jerked attention from the West, including the United States and Russia and the United Kingdom. Gentlemen, though, let's now shift gear to another important matter which regards the ruling Jubilee Party and the unfortunate political posturing and position of the ruling party of President Uhuru Kenyatta in regard to the concerns that have been raised by the DP William Ruto's allies. And the picture on your screens is the cartoon edition of today. The isolation unit of Jubilee, the DP William Ruto, is staring at all what's developing from the window. The door is completely sealed with wooden, of course, sticks that are being, of course, are being enforced by the Raila Odinga, who is the ODM party leader, and another person, I presume, who is a fierce critic of the DP, William Ruto, perhaps explaining the sort of the office that he works, but wields no power, as illustrated by one of the main papers, mainstream papers here in the country, the Standard, over the weekend on Saturday. But that, again, is the point with which there are concerns in the country. Wakili Laichena, if I may come to you, I mean, how will President Uhuru Kenyatta then head off the accusations raised by his deputy William Ruto of constant rejection in his own party?
Well, I think this is a war that began a long time ago. And it is unfortunate that even at this situation that we are in the country and in the whole world, per se, that it is still ongoing. It's a cold war, if I may say, between the president and his deputy, which was seen long time ago. Well, perhaps if you may ask, sometimes we want to see things done in reality as they are. You've seen, like even on the reporting of the, that is a weekly or a daily reporting on this COVID-19, the developments, what the state is doing, what the country is doing, what they intend to do, the meetings that they are doing to discuss this. We have not seen the deputy president anywhere. He's missing. And I don't think the deputy president is missing just because it is normal or it's just a coincidence that he's not
being sidelined?
In my opinion, he's being sidelined. Look at the Minister for Health. Kagwe comes today, reports the development of COVID-19. Tomorrow the CSA comes. There is the Mwangangi. The following, the other day, the PS comes and the reports. And you've seen, they work as a team and they help one another. But have you ever seen the deputy president coming even to speak on behalf of the state or on behalf of the president what is happening? Not even a single day. Nor has even the president himself addressed the nation together with the deputy president. And it is only at this moment or this year and maybe some part of last year that this has happened, because initially you saw they worked like brothers, like twin brothers, always together, doing things together, working out together. But it is true. The deputy president is watching through the window. So what do you expect? What do you think the members who are maybe the followers of the deputy and the followers of the president are doing? So maybe it is unfortunate because these things are not happening now. We cannot see them happening now. But the reality is that there is no stability in the ruling party. And if it is, they are pretending that it is there. If it is, we should be seeing it with our own eyes. We should be able to tell that this is happening. Because why would the deputy president be speaking on his own without the president? Because they're supposed always to work together.
All right.
Yeah, and inseparable. All right. So, well, I may not be able, because we've seen what was happening before COVID-19 came in, the issues of referendum, the issues, whatever, the reggae, which was stopped. Unfortunately, it was never to be stopped, but it was stopped.
Okay.
So you see, nothing cannot be stopped in this country. It's only God, my friend.
All right.
So now, it is unfortunate. We don't know, but a lot is cooking. Unfortunately, maybe they are not able to converge and discuss it. But of course, these people talk. And we are waiting to see what happens.
Yes, from the two principles.
Yes.
All right. Wakili Echesa, then, in terms of the registrar of political parties telling the ruling Jubilee party to put the house in order, why do you think, or what do you think informs the largest party in the country to doctor the minutes of a meeting purportedly that never happened and instill changes?
Ayub, to even say to doctor, it means that you are sure that those minutes were doctored. We should begin by saying the purportedly doctored minutes. Because one faction is saying the minutes are real. Another faction is saying the minutes are doctored. But before I respond to that question, I wish to make it clear that Jubilee Party has a very serious political virus that is eating it called ambition. And among the infected persons is one William Ruto. And he has been placed under political quarantine within the party.
As we can see from the pictures.
As we can see. And then other suspects who have contracted the virus are Aden Duale, Murkomen. But Duale seems to be recovering well in isolation. You don't hear him speak nowadays. Murkomen and the likes of Kuria and a group of Tangatanga MPs are violating the Jubilee regulations to contain this virus called ambition. And they are moving elsewhere, everywhere, making noise. They'll soon be trimmed to size. Why am I saying this? Jubilee is no longer a going concern. We do not have a party called Jubilee.
For who? For the president?
In any sense, for the president.
Reality.
In reality, it is not a going concern. You know, when we say a company is no longer a going concern, it means the company, in essence, no longer exists.
The name that exists.
Yeah, there's only the name that exists. Party system in this country revolves around personalities. So Jubilee Party was revolving around the personality of Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto. And then they came together into a marriage. Immediately after 2017 elections, divorce notice was served. It was followed by a divorce petition. And what we are now witnessing is that the court has already granted a decree, Nisi.
Okay.
We are waiting for a decree absolute in 2022 when the president finishes its term so that the marriage is declared void to the extent of that, okay, is declared void. Therefore, we should not imagine that William Ruto will wrestle Jubilee from Uhuru Kenyatta. How? Uhuru is the party. How can you, then wrestling Jubilee from party means removing Uhuru Kenyatta from power. And even if Uhuru surrendered the party to him after 2022, of what use will it be? Uhuru will walk out with these assets. What will Ruto remain with?
Okay. Now, observing the deepest reaction since March 2018, the person of his concern is the ODM leader Raila Odinga. And there has been a form of a political predator approach from the Tanga Tanga group or wing of the ruling party in regards to Odinga. Why are they opposed to a person who their boss, the president, is contented with in the political bed?
And that is Ruto's first mistake. Ruto ought to have learned lessons from his predecessors. Look at Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, the first vice president of this country. He resigned in 1966. And when you read his book, Not Yet Uhuru, he gives reasons for his resignation as being a vice president who had no powers at all. The President Kenyatta was delegating the VP's powers even to assistant ministers. And out of conscience, Jaramogi resigned without having to fight Kenyatta. He only fought Kenyatta once he stepped out of the office of the vice president. Look at Daniel Moi. Moi survived on humility. It is humility that drove him to State House. There are rumors that Moi was once slapped by a county commissioner, the then provincial commissioner. Mungai. Moi never came out crying. Moi never tweeted. Moi never went to public rallies and say, I'm being disrespected. Then there came Karanja, who was forced to resign once Parliament voted in favor of a motion by David Mwenje, motion of no confidence. Look at Kibaki. When he was demoted to VP, he resigned. Look at Saitoti and how Moi is said to have politically frustrated Saitoti. And I'm sure if Prof had not died, his political career was on the rise. William Ruto's major weakness has been his political pride. Instead of eating a humble pie and lying low like an envelope so that he can demonstrate to the nation that I'm being fought for no reason and win the national sympathy from Kenyans, he is busy retaliating and fighting imaginary shadows.
Okay, the shadow, of course, will not follow you up in the darkness. But, Wakili, as you finish up in giving me your last word, the tough task that awaits the DP William Ruto is his current position in terms of his response. He appears to be the Donald Trump of Kenya, tweeting, of course, his first hand in terms of responding to his critics. Is that utterly essential for him?
Well, I think, if I may say, I'm not the advice of the deputy president, but, well, sometimes he behaves in a manner that may end up losing so many sympathizers, like we are talking about sympathy or like that. But I also want to put this point across in disagreement with my brother here. Humility. If you asked me, Deputy President Ruto has been from the beginning when these things started in terms of when Raila joined the president and all that, we can say he has been humane all the time, because the only fight or the only thing that we have seen the deputy president fighting the president on, or maybe not agreeing with the president, is the joining of Raila in the Jubilee party. And to be sincere, I may say that even if Raila came in part to because of the handshake to work together with the Jubilee government, unfortunately he also came to tear it apart. One thing I may say is that he should, the shaking of hands with the president did not mean that Raila should come and start doing some activities which are supposed to be done by the Jubilee Party. The reason being, Jubilee Party is the ruling party. Raila is on the opposition side. Then he comes and is given authority to perform duties which are supposed to be performed by maybe even the deputy president. And you saw that it is clear whatever he does is the business of the deputy president and all that. You will not expect any deputy president to start, and remember this is a deputy president, not a vice president. He was elected with a similar vote that elected the president. He is not a vice president who is nominated or appointed, all right? So for me, I may say that humility, I can say that the deputy president has acted with a lot of humility. Only that whatever he's fighting, you know, like for example, when Raila came on this other side of the board, they tried to depict the deputy president as if he's not supporting even the constitutional change. Yet there is no day that he ever stood and said, I'm not supporting 1, 2, 3 things, all right? So what I'm trying to say is that, well, the differences that you can see in Jubilee, and I agree with my brother now on this point that Jubilee is not a party that we are going to see beyond 2022. That I can tell you. It is just a name that is existing, and it is just a matter of time. The divorce, actually, it is true. We are just waiting for a decree absolute, because it's like already done. But the court has decided.
Thank you so much, Wakili Echesa. Thank you so much, Wakili, and lecturer of law at the University of Nairobi, Wakili Echesa. But there are lessons you can learn from Daniel Moi, for instance, who at some point his loyalty was questioned by Kenyatta. And Charles Nyonyo was called, and Kenyatta did ask him in form of what appeared to have been questioning the loyalty of Moi, and he said, is he loyal to me? And then Nyonyo said, more loyal to you than I do to you. And that might have perhaps been the point that Moi rose to power, of course, notwithstanding the other challenges. When you read about his book, it's absolutely very fascinating to read about Moi. But gentlemen, thank you. Let me just finish up, and then we'll be leaving the set for the other team to come in here. The confirmed number of cases of COVID-19, 2,406,745, 165,273. Total confirmed number of deaths. Countries or regions affected, 185. Let's see the graphics outside China and how it's looking like in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is how there appears to be the flattening of the curve in countries like Spain and in Italy, and now are handling only the matters that are in hospitals. But the graphics that you can see outside, the bar graphs down, are illustration of the American situation, where there are more than 600,000 cases across the United States of America. But there is also the other aspect of nationalism that Donald Trump has imbued, and we have seen people coming out in states like Michigan to demonstrate against the orders of stay at home by the governors who are largely Democrats. This is the world, how it's looking like in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic. The circles show the number of confirmed coronavirus cases per country, and Africa is a bit minimal. In Russia, largely, there are no cases owing to the communism state, where there are no media freedom and what you can report on. In Latin America, there is also fewer cases, and in Europe is where the concentration is now, and the United States of America and in Canada. Now, in less than a minute, I need to go out. This is the number that we have, as you can see playing out on your screens, how China is overtaking the other countries, but this is going to be ultimately changing in this playing timeline as we hit by the 18th of April, about more than 2,100,000 cases. This is how it's totaling up. It's now less than 100,000, but you can see between March and April, this number is going to triple more, and the speed at which the numbers continue to add up to supplement the already existing cases across the world. Now you can see the timeline is changing. America is coming up first, Germany, Spain coming down, China is coming down, Italy is up, the United States now more than 600,000 cases, Spain is second, Italy, Germany, France coming up, the UK equally, Iran going down, Turkey coming up, Belgium is equally a European country, and you can see how it has ultimately changed, 2.3 million cases. Now let's look at CNN. And when you replay this map, you can see how in the shaded area, how the virus started in China, in Wuhan province, in the city of Wuhan, in Hubei province, spread across the world, in the United States of America, Europe becoming the epicenter, Africa, and the US now is the concerning point for the World Health Organization. Gabriel Su saying they will be the second point of the epicenter. These are pictures incorporated. What do we know? How do I read all these charts while in isolation? Are we winning or losing? The next one is how long will this last? The questions people are asking, how dangerous is the virus? This is a 5-part graphic series, help, of course, composed by Al Jazeera, which will filter through the headlines and the charts behind the coronavirus pandemic across the world. Thank you so much for joining us here on the broadcast. We appreciate your time, and thank you to the two gentlemen, the lawyers on set, Wakili Ken Echesa, lecturer of law at the University of Nairobi, advocate of the High Court, and equally Wakili Mugambi Laichena, who joined us in regard to the racism issue, the ruling Jubilee Party and certain times, and of course to the regional coordinator of Red Cross, who joined us from the county, I presume, of West Pokot County, and in terms of response in regard to laying out that response to the affected people in the two counties of Elgeyo Marakwet and West Pokot counties following the mudslides, and equally to the chairperson of the Kenya National Union, who we had talked about the welfare of the frontline workers who are our soldiers in this war. We'll see you tomorrow at the same time, 11 to 1 p.m. And keep it Ibru TV. 1 p.m. news is coming up next after the break here on the broadcast. And good afternoon.